So I've only recently arrived in Florida. One of the first things that I did was go to my local used bookstore. Of course, that's just what you do. And there front and center were a number of novels by Hiaasen. Now, I've never read Hiaasen, but I am well aware of who he is just from decades of reading Times book reviews and just cultural osmosis, I guess. And I know that he is the Florida crime guy, right? I know that he is a Miami Herald reporter, columnist. I don't know if he still is, but he certainly was. And I know that he is a native Floridian. So I figure, well, here I am. I'm in Florida. Now's my chance to read some Hiaasen and see what he's all about. My name's Andrew, and usually on the Isle of Misfit Books, I say, oh, this is where I share with you the books that have struck me and stuck with me in my 25 years of working in rare books. But today, instead of going back in the aisle and digging something out and dusting it off and presenting it to you, I wanted to do something a little bit different where I just discuss something that I recently read. So this is more of a, what the fuck did I just read, than an actual book from the aisle. After reading through some of the blurbs and flap copy, I settle on Stormy Weather. Not entirely randomly, because it kind of speaks to me, where the plot centers on the aftermath of a massive, Hurricane Andrew type of storm. The block that I'm living on looks like my grandfather's teeth when he took his dentures out. Like, half of the buildings are just no longer there. They're just completely wiped out, washed away by the storm. And of the places that remain, half of those are for sale. And yet just, you walk down to the beach and you see that they are building literal castles on the sand. So I thought, okay, this will be about a community like where I'm presently staying in the aftermath of a major storm. So maybe I can get a sense for what that must have been like 2 years ago. And God, I hope it's not an accurate portrayal of how that all went. Knowing that Hiaasen is a reporter, knowing that he's a native Floridian, the implication is that as a reporter, he's been around the block, he's seen some shit, and he's heard a lot of stories and written a lot of stories, a lot of true stories. And so this novel is going to reflect his experience and reflect that reality through a fictional portrayal. I'm aware of the Florida Man memes, and I'm sure that there is some basis in reality that these come from. And it feels like Hiaasen's novels kind of predate the Florida Man meme, but maybe feed into that a little bit. Maybe that's the wellspring that the Florida Man meme comes from. And I'm very aware that crime happens and that there are shitheads here in Florida. There are shitheads everywhere. And I can't imagine that the concentration is somehow elevated in Florida. But again, I'm new here, so maybe I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. But it seems like there's this whole cottage industry. There's a subgenre of fiction that is purely like South Florida crime fiction. There are a number of authors, and I think Hiaasen, being one of the early practitioners of this genre, really staked out his claim and has done really well with it. So he's clearly profiting from it, and I think a lot of other writers and a lot of other publishers are. Somebody's making bank off this Florida Man meme, this idea that Florida is a hotbed for crime, and not just crime, but just outlandish crime and deranged characters and deranged people.
Yep, that's me. You might be wondering how I could make it all the way to 2025 without having heard of Florida Glare, which is a great name for this subgenre, coined by Adam Gopnik of The New Yorker way back in 2013 to distinguish it from LA Noir. I made a community post of my thumbnail for this video and got this response, which clued me into the name of this subgenre that I was flailing about trying to describe. Thank you for that. Much appreciated. And now back to the video.
Is Florida's shitty representation in the popular culture bleeding back into the actual culture? Is this all part of some weird feedback loop that got started in the 80s and the 90s with books like Stormy Weather, that has since grown out of that and become something larger, where Florida is almost this a metaphysical state as much as it is one of the 50 states. So the plot centers on this massive hurricane that hits Florida near Miami, tears houses off their foundations, roofs off the homes, that sort of thing. Much like Hurricane Andrew back in the 90s. You know, I feel like these massive weather events are only becoming worse, only becoming more frequent. So a book like this is very topical, unfortunately. And the plot concerns these characters that are either drawn to the area to try to make a profit, you know, scummy, low-level hoods, petty thieves, or scummy, low-level, low-class, petty salespeople and inspectors who are trying to flee the area now that their misdeeds are coming to light. There is a honeymooning couple that heads to the area or is kind of caught in the area, and that is sort of, they're the outsider. That's kind of my way in. The non-Floridian reader's way in is through this couple. They kind of represent the general populace, I would say. And then there's Skink. And Skink is a wonderful creation. He is the one-eyed former governor of the state, a Vietnam veteran. When he's the governor, everybody around him, of course, wants him to be corrupt, but he's incorruptible. And so he absconds from his position, retreats to the Florida swamp. He becomes Florida man, not in the meme sense, but in the sense that he is Florida's retribution. He is Florida's vengeance, almost a superhero kind of figure. He lives in the swamp, subsists on roadkill, and is just an outrageously over-the-top, cartoonish caricature, but a very appealing character because he does sort of represent Florida's vengeance on the outsider, such as myself, on the tourist, and on these scummy profiteers. One of my problems with the book is that Skink gets the wrong guy, you know. Snapper is the low-level hood who is sort of the novel's main bad guy, you could say. And he is a horrible person. You know, he's absolutely terrible, trying to commit an insurance fraud with his partner, Edie. But in a story about an event that Hiaasen described in one of his newspaper columns when he was writing about Hurricane Andrew, he described very eloquently as not the storm of the century, but the crime of the century, as he was lambasting the corrupt politicians and builders and lobbyists who were involved in the fiasco that became the result of Andrew. In what he himself described as the crime of the century, Snapper is not the criminal. I mean, he is a criminal. He's a thug. He's horrible. He's a racist. You know, he deserves punishment. I don't know if he deserves torture and death, but he deserves punishment by the end. But he's the main antagonist that we're given, and he's not the guy responsible for the carnage that resulted. Again, he's not helping, but he's not the bad guy. He's not the true bad guy. And so this book, to me, feels like Hiaasen is punching down. In the way that Skink represents Florida's vengeance, Snapper doesn't really represent the forces at work that led to the failing of the buildings, the failing of the infrastructure, and the failing of the community and the government response to the storm in the aftermath. So in a 1996 New York Times profile, which was published just a year after Stormy Weather, which first came out in 95, in 96, the Times did a profile on Hiaasen because that was the year that Striptease, the movie, came out, the movie starring Demi Moore. So as part of the publicity push, they had a feature on Hiaasen. And the writer of that feature says, troubled or corrupt politicians, along with ignorant tourists, greedy builders, scam doctors, and profit makers with no affection for Florida or its environment except as a potential gold mine, populate Mr. Hiaasen's books. He is a crime novelist who uses surrealism and black comedy to make a political point. Now, she doesn't elaborate on what that political point is, but I think it is true that there's a political point. But if that's the case, then Stormy Weather, I think, is making the wrong political point and going after the little guys and kind of throwing the little guys, the little individuals, under the bus as though they are somehow the ones responsible, when I would rather see, and I think it is more accurate, that they're there to try to profit. Sure, and they're not helping. But they're not the profiteers. They're not the big corporations. They're not the builders. They're not the zoners. They're not the communities. They're not the government. They are part of the problem, but they aren't the cause of the problem. You know, if you see what I'm saying. They are trying to profit, but they're not profiteers in the larger sense. And I think we see this more and more now with these disasters. The Los Angeles fires, you read about landlords raising rent because they know that people are looking for places now that their homes have been destroyed. Just terrible. During COVID and inflation, you read about corporations raising their prices because they know that they have the excuse of inflation. I would rather see Hiaasen going after these people, and he has to be aware that that's more the situation, that that is a better reflection of reality than somebody like Snapper, who, again, horrible individual, but he's not the culprit. He's not the villain, except he's the villain of Hiaasen's book. And so that makes it seem to me like the political point is that it's these individuals, these bad apples, that are making it bad for everybody down here in Florida, as opposed to the tree itself, the rotten tree, or as opposed to the basket that's holding these apples. I'm not sure exactly how that metaphor goes, but I'm also from out of town. I don't know. I've just arrived. I'm fresh off the boat. So if you know better, if you're from Florida or you've spent more time in Florida than me, I would love to hear. Am I living in Hiaasen's Florida? And it's not just that all of the characters are despicable and, you know, petty lowlifes. I love me some Noir. I love Elmore Leonard, love Jim Thompson, love Ross McDonald, aka Kenneth Millar, and Richard Stark, aka Donald Westlake, and you know, the old school Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler. I love that kind of novel, and I really wanted to like, and I really still want to like, Carl Hiaasen. I want to include him in that group. And that's why I'm open to the possibility that maybe I just got off on the wrong foot. Maybe I started with the wrong one. Maybe there is one like Bad Monkey or like Striptease that I really should read. But I think the major issue for me with the book was that I just didn't find it that funny. Despite all of the quirks of the characters and the oddities and their antics and shenanigans and the madcap pacing, I wasn't laughing. And all of my, you know, self-righteous pontification and speechifying about the politics of it would just be out the window if I was cracking up the whole time I was reading it. You know, it would be this would be a very different video. You know, I watched the trailer for the Apple TV show of Bad Monkey, and that made it look like just a series of stitched together, carefully constructed quips. It didn't seem that funny either. The premise is great. His knowledge of Florida and all things Floridian just shines through. He's a master of details. Every character notices details that are appropriate to that character and that really ground you in the scene, ground you in that character, helps him build that character. I just was hoping for something that was more humorous or more disastrous, I guess, more based in the reality of the aftermath of a serious storm like that. Anyway, just wanted to share my thoughts after reading one Carl Hiaasen novel. But again, very willing to stand corrected, very open to criticism, and very open to being shown the path to get into Hiaasen. These aren't the first ones I've seen down here in Florida either, but they always just seem so slow and lazy. Boy, I'm really tempting fate, aren't I? Talking about how slow the gators are and how there are no criminals here in Florida, the way Hiaasen makes it seem. I'm really pushing my luck, so I'm going to stop there. Let me know what you think about Hiaasen. Let me know what you think about Florida. I'd love to hear. Does Hiaasen have it right? Am I just being naive? I've been accused of being naive before, so it's entirely possible. I certainly hope not. Anyway, let me know if there's a place where I should continue with Hiaasen to really get into him, and if I should watch Bad Monkey on TV, the Apple TV adaptation, if it's worthwhile. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you got some enjoyment, got some value out of this little discussion of Stormy Weather and Hiaasen, please leave a like and consider hitting subscribe. I will be back real soon with a book from the aisle, and I'm really excited about it. I think you're really going to like it, so I hope to see you in that one. And thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.